Okay, so hello, welcome back to another Unity multiplayer tutorial. In this one, we're going to be building a character selection screen. So along the bottom, you can see the icons of all the characters to pick from. And whenever you pick one, you get the character's name at the top right, and we can add some more info over there. Then on the left, you can see all the other people on your team and what characters they're picking. And then we'll also be adding a selection animation, so when you pick a character, they appear in the middle, they do their little animation towards the screen until they're done, and that'll happen every time you switch characters. So what you're seeing in the background right now is the prototype that I made a while ago that we'll be kind of working towards, but we'll also be adding a bit more polish for the tutorial series on the channel, so we'll be adding different character models and different icons in this case, rather than just using all these placeholder sprites. And this tutorial will be split up into two, so we'll have the video today focusing on getting most of the coding done and everything set up, and then in the next tutorial next week, we'll be focusing on getting some cool animations and characters to make it look nice. So I think that's everything you need to know about the project. If you end up finding the tutorial useful, it would really help if you gave it a like and a subscribe, but without further ado, let's get started. So as always, there'll be links down below to the documentation if you want to get access to that. We also have the links to our GitHub projects. So we've got the template from last video, which is what I'll be starting with today. And then we've got the repo for the project we're doing here, which will have all the character selection stuff that we're making. And then, like I said, for the next tutorial to kind of make it look a lot nicer, we'll be using something like Mixamo to get all these different characters and animations that we can use for our project. So now we're in Unity, I'll go through what we've already got in the project. And if you haven't already, I'd recommend following the previous tutorial, which is just showing you how to get set up with Unity multiplayer. And we build this little template project, which lets you simply spin up a host, server, or a client. And that's what we'll be using for all my different tutorials we do from now on. To save time at the start, we can just start with this. So we have the network manager. And one thing I've changed for this tutorial is I have removed the player prefab. So we can go into there and we can set it to none. We can change that. And that's because in this example, the player doesn't spawn in as soon as they connect to the server. We just go to a character selection screen. So we don't actually need this here. And that's all I've changed on the main menu besides the title here, changed it from template to multiplayer character select. And then in our other scene, if we go across to the gameplay scene, I've made all of the UI because that's not something I want to waste time doing in the video. So if you want to download the project off GitHub, you've got the link for that if you want to just have the UI like how I have it now. In here, we've got our character select UI with the canvas. We've got an area at the top right for our character info, which at the moment is just their name. So if we turn that on and then we put in a character's name, so Dapper, you see it like that. But let's leave that off for now. Then we have the character holder at the bottom. This is where you'll have all the icons for the different characters to select from. And then we have the player cards on the left. And this is where you see, if we were to turn these on, it's not going to look great if we just turn one on, but we have where the icon is, their name, and their character name. It'll look better in the actual scene rather than on this background here. But let's leave those visuals off. So this is just the UI setup, and now we can jump into the coding. So over here in the scene, we have the character select, which is holding all of our UI. And on there, we have the character select display script. So we'll open that up, and that's where we'll be starting. All I've done is make it inherit from network behavior because it's a networked object. We're going to need to sync some variables across the network in here. So the first thing we need to do in here is listen to when a client connects or disconnects from the server, because we'll need to show them on the side of the screen and remove them for everyone else. So we can override in here network spawn, and then we can override network despawn, and we can get rid of these base calls that it puts in for us. And for now, we'll just think about the server code. So we can say if is server, run this code, and we'll do that in both methods. Can also hide the side here to give us some more space. So to know when a player connects or disconnects, we can listen to the event network manager .singleton .onClient connected callback, and we can add that to a method, or I can add a method to that. So when this gets called, it will run this method. So handle client connected, and then we'll go to the next line and do network manager singleton on client disconnect callback, and we'll subscribe to handle client disconnected. We can then take both these calls, put them into the despawn version of this, and then we can unsubscribe. So we can stop caring about it when the character selection screen goes away. So if we go from the selection screen into the actual game, we stop caring about this and we can unsubscribe. We now need to make these two methods that it will call. So we'll make private void handle client connected, and these take in a ulong, which will be the ID for our client. So ulong client ID, so it's which client has connected. And in the other method, it'll be which client has disconnected. And what we actually want to do when someone connects is add them to a list of their client IDs along with which character they've selected, and eventually if they've readied up or not, just any data we need per player in the lobby. And we also want to make sure that we don't miss any players that are already in the lobby. This can often happen with the host. If you spin up the server and the client yourself, you might connect before this gets called and then you end up missing yourself. So just to make sure it doesn't miss yourself, you can call, you can do for each network client, and we'll just call it client, in network manager .singleton.connected clients list. So there's a list of all the clients on the server. We can say go over all those clients and call the method manually. So handle client connected, passing in client.client ID. And so the events make sure anyone who connects after this point is added, and this line here makes sure that anyone who's already connected is added. And then for this list of data, I said we're going to need to store the ID and the character they're selected and whether they're ready. That will all need to be synced across the network. So to actually do that, we need to make our own data type. So I've got the script over here. It's just a public struct called character select state. And to be able to sync it, we need it to inherit iNetwork, or implement, sorry, iNetwork serializable. So let's hit control period. We get this method to implement. And all we have to do in here is think about what data we want to sync. So let's add a public ulong client ID, and we'll also add a public int character ID, like so. So these are the two things at the moment that we want to sync. And then to actually do the syncing, we just say serializer.serialize value, and then you pass in ref and then your variable, so client ID. And then we just do that again for the other variable. And if you ever add more variables, you just do it like this. For most data types, this will work. But then because we want to sync this as a list, we have to implement one extra thing. So we'll also implement iEquatable, and then you pass in the type of the struct, so character select state, like so. And then we can implement that method. I like to put that at the bottom. And this method, we need to return true or false based on whether this struct matches the one being passed in. And this is how it determines whether we need to sync the value across the network. So it's like checking, oh, if the value is the same as what it used to be, then why would we sync it? We don't need to bother doing that. So to know if it's changed, we just say return client ID is equal to other.client ID and character ID is equal to other.character ID. So we're saying here, well, these are equal if these all match, but if any of these values are different, then they're not equal, and therefore we need to sync it. So now we've made our own custom data type, we can go back and we want to make a list for this. So at the top, I'll make a private list, sorry, network list, because we need to sync it. And we can pass in our custom type, so the character select state. And I'll just call it players for now. And to initialize a network list, you have to go in the update method. Sorry, not the update method, the awake method. And then we need to set it equal to a new list. So players equals a new network list of type character select state. And that then allows us to go into our two methods we made. So when someone connects, we say players.add a new character select state, and we need to pass in their client ID. So we want to go to its constructor and let us pass it in that way. So let's go back to that script. So for the constructor, we can do public character select state, and we'll want to take in ulong client ID, and then we'll also want to take in int character ID. Make sure these are lowercase. And by default, I'll set the character ID to -1 unless told otherwise, and that will just mean they haven't got a character selected. And then we'll say client ID is client ID being passed in, and character ID is equal to character ID being passed in. So just make sure the capitalization is correct, otherwise this may cause you an issue. And we can go back. And now we can pass their client ID in to the constructor. So now a player joins the server and the server adds them to a list. And the list will store, like I say, what character they've selected and eventually whether they're readied up or not in the next video. So now when someone joins the server will then add them to a list where we store who they are and what character they have selected. And then when they disconnect, we want to go through that list. So we're going to loop. We'll do a for loop through the players.count. And we'll say if players i.client ID matches the client ID of the person who's just left. Then we want to say here players.remove at this index and then break. That's it, that's all we want to do. We just want to remove them from the list when they disconnect from the server. So now it would be nice if we could actually select a character. So let's make what a character is. A character we're going to have as a scriptable object that we can create instances of in our project. And all we're going to add to it for data is we're going to add an ID. Every character is going to have an ID. We'll default to -1. And then they're also going to have a string display name that we put on the UI. Let's put new display name for now. And then they're also going to have an icon that we display on the UI too. So private sprite, call it icon. And then I'll make getters for these so we can read it. So ID returns ID, string display name returns display name. Make sure I do the capitals correctly. And then finally the icon. So public sprite icon returns icon. The reason I've done it like this is so we can have all these private fields set in the inspector, and then we can get them publicly here without accidentally being able to modify them. We then also need a way to load all of the characters onto the UI and to be able to pick from them. So I've got another script called character database. It's also a scriptable object, and that will store an array. So serialized field private character array. We have all our characters here, so just call it characters equals new character array of size 0, but we can modify that size in the inspector. We want a way to be able to get all of our characters to load them up onto the UI. So public character array get all characters, and that will just return the array. And then we'll also need a way to get a specific character when we click on their button. So let's make a method that returns a character, and we'll call it get character by ID, taking in the ID of the character we want to get. And we can loop over for each var character in characters. So if that character matches the ID, so if character.id is equal to the ID coming in, then return that character. And that's how we can get the sprite for a character or anything about it, like its name as well, just from its ID. We'll need to make sure though, if we somehow can't find them, then we return null. We need to have that return at the end. And then this allows us, if we close these, to go over to character select button. And in here, we want to have reference to an icon, because the character select buttons are all just going to be icons. So serialized field private image, icon image. And when we spawn these buttons in, we'll also need to assign a character to each button. So let's make a public method called setCharacter that takes in the character select display itself, character select, and then the character this button is for. And the reason we pass in the character select display is so that we can let it know when we are pressed. So if someone presses our button, we say, hey, character select, this character was selected. So we'll need to store these things privately. We'll make a private character select display called character select. We'll make a private character called character. And in here we can set them. So this dot character select well, I'll just assign them both locally. So this dot character select equals character select. So this data we're getting passed in when we are spawned, we're storing it. And then we can also set our icon. So we can say icon image dot sprite is equal to the character we're being assigned icon. And then because this script is on a button, we can make a public method, public void select character. When someone clicks on this button, we say, hey, character select. Someone selected this character, so we'll make a select method that takes in a character. So now let's head back to the character select display and we'll make that method. So public void select character, or was it just select? Just select, and it takes in a character. And as soon as someone selects a character, we want to update the UI. So we're going to have a character name text component that we can set the text on. And we'll set it to be our character's display name. And we'll also have their info panel that we want to enable at this point. So character info panel dot set active true. And then we'll need to go and actually add these at the top. So let's add reference to them. We'll add serialize field, private, and then we'll want to have the game object here, character info panel, and a text component, so tmp underscore text, character name text. So as soon as we click the character, our own UI will update, but then we need to tell the server that we selected this character. We need them to know. And that's by an RPC, which is a method that gets called over the network. So to make the RPC, we make our method private void select server RPC, and then we pass in the ID of the character we're selecting, so character ID. And you also here need to pass in server RPC params, and we can just call that server RPC params equals default. This is the standard naming of an RPC. So it's what you want it to be called, followed by server RPC, and then you end the parameters with this. So if you want to pass something in, you just pass this in, and the server RPC params is done for you. So to actually tell the server, hey, I want to pick this character, we just say here, select server RPC, passing in our character's ID. But by default, RPCs can only be done to the server if you own the object that you're calling it from. And in this case, no one owns the character select display. So to let us do this, we have to add an attribute to this method. And the attribute is called server RPC, which we needed to add anyway. But then we also need to add require ownership equals false. And it should be happy with this. And now the server has received our message saying we want to pick a certain character. So now what it can do is it can do a for loop through all the players. So players.count. And we can say if players i.client ID matches the client ID of who sent us the message, which is server RPC params dot sender client ID, dot receive dot sender client ID. So saying if this person in the list is the person who sent us the message, then let's set this person's character ID. So players I equals new character select state. So whenever you're updating someone's state in this list, you have to set it equal to a new instance of the struct and just pass through all the data. So the client ID is staying the same, so it's just players i.client ID. And the character ID is becoming the character ID they sent over the network, so character ID. Okay, we're nearly there. All that's left now that the server updates their list of player data, is that the clients then need to display that on their own UI. I need to update my UI when someone else on the team changes their character. I need to be able to see that on the side. So I've called the things on the sides player cards, so we can go over to the player card script. It's the final one for this tutorial. And the player card script is going to need reference to a few things. We'll need reference to the character database, so we can grab its name and icon. So character database. We're going to need reference to a game object for the visuals, so we can turn them on and off. So visuals. We'll then want reference to the icon image to update the character icon. So character icon image. And same goes for the text. So we'll need two text components. One for the player name and then one for the character name. So TMP text, player name text, and also one for the character name text. And unlike the character select buttons at the bottom, they get set up at the start, but then they stay like that the whole time. Their icons never change, whereas the card on the left updates every time the player does anything. So we'll need a method for updating it, public void update display, taking in character select state. And we can take that new state and update our UI accordingly. So we can say, well, if state.characterID does not equal -1, that means they've selected a valid character, and then else means they've selected an invalid character. So if they ever do have no character, for example, when they join the lobby, we can just say character icon image dot enabled equals false. We'll just hide their character icon until they select a character. But if they selected an actual character, we can then say var character, and we can load it from the database. So equals character database dot get character by ID state dot character ID. So all we have here is the ID, but the database knows all the character data. So we can go grab it from there. We can say character icon image dot sprite is equal to character dot icon, and we'll just go through and do that with all the other UI. So let's also enable the image while we're here. So character icon image dot enabled equals true, and we'll also do the name. So character name text dot text equals character dot display name. And as well as the character data, we also have the player data, which is just their name. So player name text dot text equals, and I'll do $sign and then a string, and that allows me to just type player and then squiggly braces state.client ID. So we're just going to call the players for now player and then whatever their ID is. And then we need to make sure we've enabled all the visuals at this point. So visuals.setActive true. But we want a way to be able to disable them when someone leaves. So we'll make another method called disable display. And that will just set visuals setActive false. So if we call update, it will update all the UI and turn it on. And if we call disable, it will just turn it off. And now we're done with that. We're on the final part back in the character select display. So back up in the method at the start where we spawn in, we have some code here for the server. Oh, I've just realized, some of you may have noticed this earlier, I've put the for each loop for people connecting in the despawn method. That's a mistake by me. It's meant to be in the spawn method like this, of course. And then up here, we also want to do a check if is client. And keep in mind, if you're the host, you will execute both these methods, which is fine. If you're the client, just this. If you're the server, just this. So in here, we want to load up all the characters in the game and make buttons for them. So character array, all characters equals character database. I don't think we even have that yet. Nope. So at the top, we need to reference the character database. And we'll call it character database. We're also going to need a transform that we can spawn all the children for, which will be all the characters. So characters holder. We'll then want the prefab we spawn in for the character select buttons. So private game object, sorry, not game object, character select button. And we'll call that select button prefab. And finally, a reference to all of the player cards on the left side of the screen so that we can update them all. So serialized field, private player card array, player cards. That's all the references we need to add now. It's been a lot. So back to the network spawn method, we can load up all the characters from the character database. So character database.get all characters. Apparently I made a mistake here. Let's have a look back at the character database. Yeah, I wanted this to be a method, so just put the parentheses here and it'll act like a method now. And then we want to, I mean, at the end of the day, that doesn't matter too much in this case, but this is how I want to have it. And then we're going to loop over each character. So for each var character in all characters, let's spawn in a button. So var select button instance equals instantiate. We're going to spawn in the select button prefab as a child of the character holder. And then we want to set this character button to be the character in the loop. So select button instance, we're going to call set character, and the character is character. So here we need something else, do we? Ah, yes, we also need to pass in this so that we have reference back here. So when they press the button, we can call a method in this script. So we say load up all the characters. For each one, spawn in a button and assign this character to that button. And then at the end here, we need to say players. So the players list dot on list changed, which is going to get called for us whenever the list updates. We'll need to have a method for this. Handle players state changed, something along those lines. We also want to unsubscribe from that. So in the other method, if is client, we want to do the same line, but we want to unsubscribe, like so. And now we get to write the final method. I'll go put it at the bottom. So it's going to be another private void, and this time it takes in a network list event of type, whatever our type is. So that's character select state, and we'll call it change event. So when something happens with a player, whether it's someone joining, leaving, changing character, or anything like that, we'll just say loop over, so let's do a for loop, if I can do this right. A for loop over all the player cards dot length, and we'll say if players dot count is greater than I. This is to make sure we have enough players. So this isn't meant to be 1, sorry, it's meant to be I. So if we've got enough players, we then want to say player cards I dot update display, and then update display takes in the state. So the state is players I. And then if we don't have enough players, because keep in mind we have like 5 player cards, but we might only have 2 players. So in that case, we just say player cards I dot disable display, and that makes sure it hides the cards for any players who we don't have in our game. Okay, that should be it for the code. That was a lot. And now we've got to do the final step back in Unity, which is making sure all our references are set and that everything is hooked up. Then we can test it and be done with the tutorial. And then, like I said, next tutorial it'll be a bit shorter, a bit less code heavy. We'll just be making it look good. So let's go assets. I've got a characters folder, and I'm going to right click, create a new character database. I'll just call it character database. And then we'll make 2 characters for this test. So we'll do character 1. I'll call it character underscore dapper. So I'll put their ID as 1, call them dapper, and set their icon to be this UI sprite. And then I will duplicate that asset, and I'll rename it to be character underscore other, set the ID to 2, call them other, and give them a different icon. And then on our character database, we just want to add both of them to its list here. So we've got dapper and other in this list on the character database. And then over on the character select object in our scene, character database, we can assign characters holder, that's in the UI. So let's open up the UI here. So character holder, drag that in. Select button prefab. Let's go to my prefabs, UI, character selection. So we've got the character select button here. Make sure the image is assigned. And then now we can drag that in here. So character select button. The player cards, I'm going to lock this window, shift select all my player cards and drag them into that list. So now they're all assigned. Then let me go back. The character info panel, drag that in. Same with the character name text beneath it. So that's all done on there. Make sure on our prefabs for the character, the player cards, make sure they're all set as well. So we need the database selected, drag in the visuals, drag in the icon, the name, and the other name. Make sure that's all done. And let's also make sure in the character select button, if we go down to the button component itself, make sure the on-click callback does call select character. That way it will actually work when we click it. And now everything should be done. And now that it is done, all I need to do is head back to the main menu scene, and we can hit play to do a quick test without any other clients just to make sure everything seems normal. And if it does, then we can do a build. So let's do host. We're player 0, we're selecting. We see both our characters, we click one. We see the character name appear at the top right, and then also on the player cards for everyone, and we get our icon. If I click the other one, that also happens. We can click between them. So now that we know it works on our own, I'm going to go ahead, do a file, build and run, and then we can see it with multiple players. Okay, so I've now got the build running 4 times. Let's host, join as a client, and then let's, for example, pick a character here. So we've got some data already changed in the scene. Then I can join down here, and we all see it updating. This client who just joined still has the info that this first player picked that character. They can pick someone, join on the other one. This person can then pick someone, this one can pick someone, and it's all working as you'd expect. So yeah, that's it for this tutorial. I hope you found it useful and managed to follow along. I know this was a bit longer than usual and a bit more advanced, but people have been asking for that kind of stuff. And I think I'd rather get this done over 2 weeks in 2 videos than over 3 weeks. So yeah, we got all the coding out of the way here, or most of it at least. And next time we can do a little bit of coding and we can make it just look a whole lot better. And it really adds a lot to the project once we add this character in the center of the screen who comes and does an animation towards the camera. It adds a lot and makes it look a lot cooler. That's it for now, and if you did find this tutorial useful or you liked it, then please leave a like and subscribe, share it with other people who might find it useful. It would help a lot. But that's it for now, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye. But of course, before I go, I've got to thank my patrons. A special thanks to Ryan Shu, Gregory Pierce, Mark McCorkle, Sahila, Dario Alvarez, Francisco, and David McDermott. If anyone else would like to help support the channel monetarily, the link to our Patreon is down below. If not, there are also links down below to other social media such as Twitch, Twitter, and Discord. If you could help us out by following on any of those or checking any of those out, that would be greatly appreciated. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.